is Breaking News Edition. I'm Benita Levine, starting with a tragic update. Confirmation that a 70-year-old Israeli-American grandmother from kibbutz Nir Oz, who was thought to have been one of the hostages held captive in Gaza, was in fact killed in the Hamas terror onslaught on the 7th of October. The community of Nir Oz saying Judy Weinstein Haggai, a mother of 4 and a grandmother of 7, was murdered on that day. Her 72-year-old husband, Gadi Haggai, was also killed in the massacre. Both their bodies are inside Gaza. Judy was an English teacher specializing in children with special needs. Day 83 of the war, nearly 12 weeks since the killing rampage and abduction in southern Israel. 129 hostages are still being held captive by the terror group in the Gaza Strip. The war cabinet is set to convene in the coming hours. Meanwhile, red alert sirens sounding in the north and the south in recent hours. Fighting inside the Gaza Strip intensifying, with confirmation earlier in the day that 3 more IDF soldiers have been killed, bringing the Israeli death toll in the retaliatory ground operation to 167. On the diplomatic front, Egypt confirming it has put forward a framework proposal to end the war, including a 3-stage plan for a ceasefire. Meanwhile, the latest warnings out of Hezbollah. Deputy Chief Sheikh Naim Qassem says they are still very much involved in the war and are not going away anytime soon. Let's take a listen.
Hezbollah and the resistance in Lebanon are making great sacrifices in support of Gaza and the future of this country. We are making the sacrifices that the battle requires, and they are great, but we are also repelling a great danger. We are ready for more whenever necessary. We are not intimidated by threats or warnings. We in the field are clear that we are part of this battle. If Israel goes too far, we will retaliate twice. We will not fear either Israeli or American threats or intimidation, because the future of the region now depends on this hope and this sacrifice.
So for fresh updates, let's go back to our correspondent Zach Anders. He's in northern Israel, in Akko, and Hezbollah saying it won't be intimidated by threats or by warnings. Many developments on this day up north. Bring us up to speed, Zach.
And they don't appear to be backing down, even as their own casualties mount. 129 Hezbollah militants killed since the fighting began. This, according to their own media wing inside Lebanon. This has been another day of significant fire from southern Lebanon, targeting positions all throughout Israel, even near Haifa. This location had not seen a red alert in several weeks, and today we saw potential interceptions. The IDF has yet to announce what exactly was fired into this area along the coast. Kiryat Shimona in the Galilee Finger did see fire today, some damage to the road and some auxiliary building, but it does not appear that throughout the day, in the 5 attacks that Hezbollah has taken credit for and the 5 more that appear to have happened without them, with them yet to claim responsibility for these attacks, that there was no damage or no injuries throughout all of this fire, but some 24 rockets appeared to have been fired. We're still working to get an exact number on the different attacks throughout the day, of course, and waiting for the IDF to confirm some of these events. It's been a little bit of a challenge in some of these areas that have been evacuated, because the damage and the potential rocket fire that was aimed in these areas does not get noted or collected immediately as evidence, because these communities are evacuated, and the people in charge of going, some of the community leaders to go in, have been told to do so infrequently and only a few times a week, so they aren't going regularly to check the damage.
Thank you so much, correspondent Zach Anders, live from Akko in northern Israel. More to come from Zach in the coming hours. And now, for more insight, we welcome to studio Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Doron Avital, former commander in the Special Forces in the IDF, and our senior editor, Guy Azrael. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for being here in studio. Doron, I want to come to you first because you know the North very well. You know what it means to have tensions across that front, and there are many concerns about not only the Hezbollah rhetoric, but the actions as well out of southern Lebanon. Your assessment?
Yeah, first of all, the rhetoric is important, and after they associate the hitting of this Iranian leader in Syria to us, the rhetoric really went up. And of course, this hitting, we were hitting the targets really deep in Lebanon, I would say halfway to Beirut, near Sidon, before Sidon, and they were hitting, they were sending this aircraft close to Akko. We have to understand that Haifa, if they would be hit, if somebody would be hitting us in Haifa, this means, I think, a full-blown war. So the distances are starting to extend, and this is an indication that the tension is high. Nobody wants to be first. Whether there'll be an escalation or whether we can de-escalate, everything is open still.
We heard the Hezbollah deputy chief also saying they do not fear Israeli or American threats of intimidation. So break down for us the significance of the U.S. support. We know about the fleets waiting, but what does it mean right now? It's day 83 of the war, tensions simmering up north, and the role of the U.S. could be significant.
I think the U.S. role is in terms of deterrence towards Iran, and I think the Hezbollah, in terms of the might power that they have, I think it's something that we know about, we can fight against, and Lebanon is an arena that we've been fighting many times before, in 82 and 2006. So we are ready to this kind of battle. We don't need any U.S. involvement in no way, no boots on the ground, but of course help in terms of interception in some context, because the amounts of weaponry and missiles that the Hezbollah has, and the way that they can, the amount much more exact than what we have in Gaza, and the fact that they can target center of Israel, Haifa and Tel Aviv, this is dramatic. So this would be escalation. A full-blown war is a dramatic thing. We don't need boots on the ground, but we might need some help.
Something we will talk about in more detail in a short while. Gentlemen, stay with us. We've got more to discuss, but right now, let's go back to our senior defense correspondent, Jonathan Regev. He is standing by in southern Israel, and a range of developments on this day. We also know, over and above the sirens sounding earlier in Ashkelon and in some communities close to the border, that troops found a tunnel entrance and a rocket launcher inside a mosque in Khan Yunis in the Gaza Strip. Bring us up to speed on the latest developments, Jonathan.
Yes, and next time that Israel is criticized for attacking a mosque, seemingly a civilian and a religious site, right? So this is what mosques are used for, among other purposes, in the Gaza Strip, a shaft leading to a tunnel which served as a headquarters for Hamas. This one going right from the mosque. Of course, why do so? First, the assumption perhaps that Israel will not attack a mosque, considering the criticism it will bring, and if Israel does go with it, then of course Hamas can present an outcry to the international community, and we can surely expect reaction from countries such as Turkey, maybe Qatar, saying that Israel is really out of line targeting these sites. But mosques, as we know, just like every other civilian infrastructure in the Gaza Strip, is used for much more than just religious purposes. We see what this is all about.
Jonathan, the heart of the nation still waiting for word on the 129 hostages still being held somewhere in Gaza, maybe in those tunnels that we're looking at. It's certainly not clear. Talk to us about the fighting that is intensifying inside, the high-intensity fighting as it's being described, how it impacts that search for those hostages who may be anywhere across the Strip right now.
And we can relate perhaps to some of the interviews that we heard from hostages that came back. And they said that they felt the bombings very well. They were concerned that these bombings may actually hit them, of course not intentionally, but since we don't know exactly where the hostages are being held, the army sometimes perhaps has to be a bit more careful regarding to the places where it attacks.
Thank you so much. Senior Defense Correspondent Jonathan Regev, live from southern Israel. Thank you, Jonathan. More to come from him in the coming hours. And I want to bring in now our senior editor, Guy Azriel, on exactly what we're talking about right now in that part of the region.
Right. You were discussing the hostage situation, obviously the most burning topic for Israelis waiting for information about the whereabouts, the well-being of those Israelis still being held by Hamas now 83 days into this war. Our friends from Channel 12 just reporting just a short while ago that we already know that the Israeli War Cabinet is set to convene this evening. Well, information comes in now about a possible new Qatari initiative for a hostage release deal. According to that report, that initiative is different from the previous one that we saw, the previous ones that we saw in recent weeks. We know of the Egyptian proposal that was not accepted by Hamas and the Islamic Jihad just a few days ago. We also know very well what Israel is willing and not willing to do. We saw what happened in the previous hostage deal back in November. Israel was willing to halt the war for a certain period of time, a pause, as Israel described it, and also willing to release Palestinian prisoners, obviously those, including those with blood on their hands, responsible for the killing of Israelis. This is something that, to a large degree, it seems like the Israeli public and the Israeli government are willing to accept. Wider concessions that Hamas is asking for, like a complete halt of the war, well, that is a completely different story. And all of this, of course, is happening as Israel is still engaged in its battles in Gaza, trying to eliminate Hamas's military capabilities. And Israel, at least from what we hear from the heads of the government, from Netanyahu, from Gantz, from Gallant, they will not stop until Hamas is eliminated. How do you do that while you are still engaged in a hostage release deal with Hamas? Well, perhaps the Qataris have better answers that we'll know about very soon.
Perhaps Doron Avital has better answers.
No, I think the top three priorities are the hostages, the infrastructure, and then targeting the senior leaders of Hamas. We think Khan Yunis is the center of focal point because we saw in Damascus the entry to the tunnel. We think many of our hostages are there, and we're pretty confident that many of the Hamas leaders, the high echelon is in Khan Yunis. This is why there's so much focus there. If there would be a normal hostage deal, Israel would go for it. The public is fully behind it. The only problem, of course, that we can't hold the fire. We can't decide that we end the war. This would mean like surrendering to Hamas. This is unacceptable. This is not in the cards. But a normal deal brokered by Qatar and Egypt, the Israeli public and the cabinet would go for.
Because the whole nation is waiting for updates and word, proof of life for the hostages. And just in recent hours, we had the tragic news that the 70-year-old grandmother, Judy Weinstein Chagai, who was believed to have been one of the hostages, had in fact been killed on the day. And Doron, help everybody understand what it means that there is confirmation that the body of this grandmother and her husband, a 72-year-old man, they are being held by Hamas right now. When we're talking about potential deals, Qatar getting involved, Egypt before as well, what does that mean when you hear that bodies of Israeli civilians are being held right now inside Gaza?
I think it's unacceptable. I never liked trading bodies. I think the way they do it, it's cynical and unacceptable. Civilians on top of it. For the families that right now they know, so it's the only relief that the uncertainty is behind them. And it's important also for us to know exactly the condition of the hostages that we are going into the trading. But of course, cynical move by Hamas, they do it all the time. But this is the enemy, we have to deal with it, and if we can broker a reasonable deal, we should go for it.
Last time there was a hostage release deal, obviously it involved some kind of pause or truce. Give us an understanding from the perspective of a military operation, what kind of pause would work for the IDF? In other words, allow it to stop for the release of hostages, but not lose enough momentum in its operation to eliminate Hamas.
Exactly. I think the IDF proved there were a lot of worries in the previous phase that maybe the IDF would lose the momentum. Momentum is key to victory in the battlefield. But now we're in a different phase. I think we are really rooted in the area. We know the area. We entered in enemy territory. The enemy knows the territory better than us and has all this infrastructure underneath. Now we're in a different position. We are rooted in all sorts of places. We can hold the position. We can go over this infrastructure, and we can allow ourselves a ceasefire if there's a hostage deal, which makes sense. So I'm not worried about the capabilities of the army. Also, it might help a ceasefire to just ease a little bit the catastrophe of the humanitarian aid in the south of Gaza. So a good deal that makes sense. Israel would go for it. The public is there, and the cabinet, I think, right now, completely behind it.
Guy, I want to bring you in on Judy Weinstein-Chagai, a grandmother, a teacher for special needs children, not a threat to anybody clearly in the world. She was killed on the 7th of October. We now have that confirmation, and we also now, as we've been discussing, know that her body is being held by Hamas. Talk to us about the psychological manipulation and strategy out of this terror organization right now, day 83.
Goes without saying, Benita, the large majority of those casualties on October 7th were civilians. This is what Hamas attempted to do, to hurt Israel in the soft stomach, to enter these Israeli communities. This was not an improvised attack. This was a well-planned attack, as we know now from various investigations of the IDF into what led to this massacre. Hamas has planned this attack for a very long time, including infiltrating those communities, slaughtering Israelis in their homes, civilians in their beds. In this case, Judy was the oldest hostage in the hands of Hamas until now, presumed to be alive until now. She was out on her morning walk together with her husband on that October 7th, and therefore they were among the first to be hit by these terrorists who are just outside the kibbutz when they were met with those terrorists who made their way out of Gaza into those Israeli communities. Obviously, Nir Oz was one of the kibbutzes that was most severely hurt during this massacre. About a third of the kibbutz was either murdered or taken kidnapped by Hamas for a very long time. The Israeli military has attempted to collect information about her whereabouts. She was alive when her husband was shot. She even had the time to call the emergency services and even film a short video describing where she is and what is happening around her, announcing that her husband was shot next to her as she was seeking refuge. And very sadly, today the family was informed by the military that according to the information that they have, Hamas has murdered Judy already on October 7th, and her body is in the hands of Hamas, as is the body of her husband. Of course, she's an American citizen. We heard last week President Joe Biden saying he was heartbroken by the news of the fact that Gadi Chagai, her husband, has been found to be dead. And I'm sure we'll hear similar statements from Biden following her death. Of course, both of them American citizens.
Beyond evil to think what
a reminder for all of us as to what Hamas is about, the Hamas ISIS. I can remind our viewers, a chancellor, the German chancellor that was here, called Hamas the new Nazis. We've heard American officials calling them worse than ISIS. We should not forget the atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th, what is their ideology, what they are all about, and why Israel is fighting back now against Hamas in Gaza, why Israel is sacrificing all these soldiers. This is the last thing that Israeli mothers or an Israeli public wants to see right now. Young Israeli soldiers risking their lives, losing their lives, as we see every day in those tunnels, in those narrow streets of Gaza and Khan Yunis. This is the last thing that Israelis wanted Israelis believed or hoped for such a long time that you can live side by side next to the people of Gaza, next to Hamas. Unfortunately, this was the misconception of the Israeli government for so many years, of the defense establishment, etc., etc. Well, that failed, and now Israel has to prevent Hamas from being able to execute more attacks like these.
Doron.
Yeah, first of all, it has to be clear that when the IDF announces to the family that that she's dead, I mean, this is verified. I mean, we wouldn't take any chances if there's even a slight chance. It's not knowledge, it's like a hardcore fact. And for the family, it's a closing of a chapter, a tragic chapter, and they can now grieve for the two parents and grandparents that they were. Of course, Hamas is an enemy that committed atrocities that are unimaginable in our context. Never in the history of Israel there was such an event in this magnitude. This is why we are in Gaza. This is why we have to conclude it with victory and with bringing our hostages back.
And a reminder that those hostages include a baby, Kfir Bibas, who is now 11 months old, and people ranging in all sorts of ages, peace activists, teachers, people who just wanted to live their life, meant no harm to anyone at all. It is still unfathomable. Day 83 of the war. And Guy, there's new footage out as well coming from Kibbutz Re'im from the 7th of October. What is shown in that footage? What more can you tell us about what is unfolding? More details confirmed about what actually happened on the 7th of October.
Yes, we keep getting more and more videos from CCTV in this case of that infiltration into Kibbutz Re'im, one of the many communities that was hit by these terrorists. In this video, we can see the trucks of those Hamas terrorists who, of course, because of the immense failure, were able to make their way very casually into these Israeli communities. The black car that you see in the front there was the car of the head of the security team in the kibbutz. He was outside the kibbutz, outside that gate when they arrived. He was engaged in a very short gun battle with those terrorists who, of course, was completely outnumbered. We're talking about dozens of terrorists that have made their way into the kibbutz on that day. They shot him dead. They were able to infiltrate the kibbutz and execute their attack. 5 members of the kibbutz, including that member of the emergency team, were murdered on that day. Several civilians were among them as well. Residents were hiding in shelters. The emergency team bravely fought those terrorists. Also, this was very close to that nature party in Re'im as well, very close to the kibbutz, where, of course, so many people have lost their lives. Just another reminder of what that looked like on October 7th, 8 a.m. local time, just an hour and a half since the start of the attack. People in the kibbutz had no idea what was waiting for them.
And for those still doubting what may or may not have happened, take a look at the footage for yourself. Senior editor Guy Azrael and Colonel in the Reserves Doron Avital, thank you both so much for being here in studio on this day, day 83 of the war.